Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 869. And we are back. I'm Tom Kegley, your host. The SPaMCAST 869 features a conversation on whether AI means the death of the specialist. Dun, dun, dun. Why this matters. AI tools and agents are becoming a core feature in the workplace of nearly all forward-facing organizations. To keep up, employees need to see the future and take action. The panelists, Jeremy Berrio, Jeremy Willits, Brad Bridorf, Susan Parente, and myself. Are you ready to talk about the death of the specialist? It's time for the conversation. Hey, before we dive in, remember, are you overwhelmed? Find your focus by embracing the ideas and concepts in Mastering Work Intake, the book that Jeremy Willits and I wrote. Link in the show notes to buy a copy. It really is about getting in control of your backlog. 5 of my favorite people here today to talk about the idea that generalists are the new gold standard in a world where we're all probably going to be using AIs one way or the other. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm looking at Susan. She's online and she's somewhere in orbit. Brad is sitting in front of a big hole in the ground. Is that the Grand Canyon you're using as a background?
That's Canyonlands National Park.
Canyonlands National Park. I've been there within the last few weeks, as a matter of fact. All 3 of the rest of us that are here, Jeremy B., Jeremy W., and myself, are all sitting in front of our offices, books and amps and all sorts of other things. The rest of the folks, they're actually out in the world, so to speak. In preamble, we talked about the idea that that was put on the table by Jürgen Appelo, that we have now reached the age of the generalist, and that the specialist, having a whole room of specialists is probably not the right answer anymore. How do we react to that?
Sounds like a good idea.
Why?
I was never that fond of specialists, at least not entirely big specialists. Kind of makes me feel like, when you go to the doctor and it's like, oh, I don't take care of that. You gotta go to this doctor for that. You gotta go to this doctor for that. And then, I don't go to that doctor that much, but my parents, it's just like, who the heck knew what was going on? Because you got all these specialists and nobody's talking to each other, and there's no like general foreman for your body, right? So you're like, it's like, what's the update? What's going on? So, I think of myself as a specialist, but I'm a specialist in a number of areas. And that's actually what makes it valuable, is because you cross your specialization in different areas. So yeah, I was never that fond of I just do this one thing. Like, okay, that's really great. What if the rest of us want to talk to you?
I think the medical field, as Susan astutely pointed out, is one of the only places in human civilization where we consider specialization to be a good thing and the most appropriate thing. But even, Susan has poked at an idea where if you have something wrong with you and you have to go see 5 different people who aren't talking to one another, that's a problem. Same thing with home construction, which is another thing that Susan pointed out prior to this call starting. If you have 5 different people working in your home trying to either level a floor or put a roof on, and there's no cohesive plan to get you into that house within a finite period of time, then what good is all that? And so I think in our worlds, I would argue that the death of the specialist has already happened long, long ago. I think whether you're talking about some of the things in the manifesto or Scrum, the death of the specialist has been a reality in a lot of our worlds for a long time.
It has been helpful to have that general knowledge and a lot of my background, right? As you said, Jeremy, the connecting all the disciplines that go together and making a complicated product. That's essentially what managers do. I have a lot of background in quality, and At one point, they claimed it was software quality. Well, I realized after a while it was everything that is manifested through software. So that can be guidance and navigation, and it can be visualization of images and all kinds of other things. And if you don't have some knowledge of all those things, you're not going to be successful in that role. Now, having said that, I do think that in some technologies, there's a place for specialists. We had a person that was exclusively the expert on air data sensors, which is something that not a lot of people are going to know about. Although I will say that one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that they use that same technology across multiple products. So in that sense, there's some generalization to it.
Well, couldn't that be a place where you have like the T person, they're a specialist, but they're like lightly a generalist in many areas? That's kind of I think the value in that. And yeah, I'm not saying get rid of specialists, but as long as they're generalizing specialists.
Well, and to that point, this reminds me of I wouldn't say argument, I'll say a very vibrant discussion or dialogue with someone that I worked with a few years ago. Actually, it was about 13 years ago now that I remember. And I came into this role. I was there I was the QA guy. I was the testing guru. And he came out and says, "We need generalists. This is how it's all going to work." And I think really around then, I've heard the term before, but I never really kind of dug into it. And so my part was like, no, you need specialists to do, like, there's certain things that only certain people can do, much like in the medical field we just talked about. But to your point, Susan, what you said was like the T level where you have like you're a specialist here, but you're a generalist in all other parts. That's where I started off that point, and I've been going with that for the past, like, since then. And that, like, you should at least understand, especially in leadership and management and senior leadership, you have to have like a general idea of how things go so you can at least talk to the individuals. You don't have to know how to do things, just understand what they're talking about. Like, I was a senior executive for a software development team at one point. Last time I did software development was on a COBOL mainframe machine. And these guys were talking like Python and all this stuff. And my eyes kind of glazed over, but I at least understood what they are talking about and how to get to them. So yeah, I think you still have to have that. You're a specialist in one area, but your Venn diagram kind of goes about with a bunch of other little bubbles that kind of go into what you do.
So once upon a time, I worked in a building in Westlake, Ohio, doing COBOL and JCL and VSAM and all sorts of other things. I also worked in that building, 20 or 30.
Second tour, doing something else.
Doing something else. But it's funny. I made a joke this week in a training class about COBOL. And walked into sort of a brick wall right with my face because 6 people in that room were still doing COBOL. But the bigger issue is, right? So there were hundreds of thousands of COBOL specialists in the world. They were specialists. That's what they did. They were really good at it. And I think there probably are, maybe a couple of thousand of them floating around out there right now making a lot of money. But I can point to you at a number of those specialists that I knew when I worked in Westlake, Ohio, doing COBOL, that very frankly are greeters at Walmart right now because they didn't change. They were specialists and they latched onto it as they'd spent a lot of time and a lot of money studying, becoming huge specialists in something. And then fought and fought and fought to keep that specialty, and the world passed them by. And I think that's part of what the suggestion is, that as specialists, if you truly are invested in 100% specialty, the world will pass you by.
I had COBOL in college, but I also had Lisp and Alcol and Fortran and a bunch of other stuff. And an assembler, and a part of what I
assembler. I
took away from that
book
was that I should be learning more than one language, and I should be able to adapt to new structures and new ways of representing software. And that has continued, right? There have been all these arrays, batteries of new languages that have been coming out. And the expectation where I was working recently was that you show up for a code review, we wouldn't necessarily tell you what language the code was in. You should be able to understand all of this. So the generalization thing, or at least adaptability, was expected.
So did you ever hit them with some good old macro assembler and see whether or not they could understand what a branch was?
I did get assigned to a program where they were still working in assembler and they needed people who understood it.
Is some of this generational? Do you all think? I mean, I think that the sort of the trope back in the 1960s and 70s was probably like, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to find a firm and work with that firm for 25, 30 years.
Yep.
And be perhaps a deep specialist like Brad and Tom described. And, that will take me all the way from my 20s to end of career. And at that point, I can ride off into the sunset. But I think the attitude of folks nowadays seems to be more around, I'm going to go find the best fit for me. And if it ends up being a long-term thing, great. But I know at my current employer, the attitude that I see from a lot of early career folks is not, I want to be here for 25 or 30 years. I don't know what you all see with the companies you're working with, but I think they're very interested in learning things that make them important in their current roles, but are also hungry to either expand their roles in our current company or move elsewhere.
I think so, Jeremy, and I'm glad you said something about generational, because I was afraid if anybody was 20 to 30 that they were already lost in the conversation about languages they've never heard of before. So if you're one of those people, you can go ahead and Google it. It is out there. You can learn what Fortran is and Cobalt and all those fun things. I think that it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Little House on the Prairie. So, and then now I've lost that group again too. But anyway, just like they grew up on a farm and they had to be generalists, right? It's not just like you can't just do one thing. You got to be able to like fix the plowshares, and you got to be able to like feed the cattle. So little bit of animal husbandry, a little bit of home repair. Like you're not calling somebody up, you're not calling a tradesman up to come in and fix your plumbing. If you're living on that farm in the middle of nowhere, you're gonna figure it out yourself. So I think that's interesting. I think it kind of goes for me with the ebb and flow of centralized and decentralized computing. It's sort of like, oh, we're back at generalization. Oh, that's cool. Let's do that for a while. And then like 10 years from now, people are like, the best thing to do is specialize, and I don't know. I think balance is probably necessary. I was actually just thinking about, the T-shaped people. There's M-shaped people, and they're specialists in multiple areas. And I think that that's probably more kind of what we're looking for than, a generalist that just, we're not talking about a person that knows nothing in depth about anything. That actually isn't valuable. But if you have some depth in a few areas, that's quite valuable. And especially, so, like Steve Jobs, he was that artistic type, and particularly like around the fonts and calligraphy stuff. And then he also was like a bit of a marketing person and a bit of a techie, not as much of a techie as people think. He just surrounded himself with techies, but he bought that beauty of the user interface to the computer that did not exist before him. Love him or hate him, but he brought that. And I think that those spaces where different professions meet each other, there's a lot of tremendous value in innovation. Take cybersecurity and anything. If you want to get a law degree, my advice to you would be go learn about cybersecurity too. Now you're really valuable, because there are not a lot of people in law that know about cybersecurity. Healthcare, cybersecurity.
The argument that is being made, I think, is actually still a little generational, because in the new world order, or at least the world order that seems to be developing, just like once upon a time, Agile 8 PMI, and then PMI 8 Agile back. So we have this snake that's eating itself. is that in reality, what you need to be is just a prompter. And that's the thing that's important. As I said, early when we signed on, organization I was talking to that's been at this for a little while, just got rid of all their junior programmers. And, they're just using people who know programming a bit, but mostly no prompting. And that's what they're doing. And their code quality is up. Their code productivity is up. Their customer satisfaction is up. What we need is people that know the business and understand how to tell machines how to do the work and how to create the software.
So a couple of things. I remember when I was in university back in the early 90s, there was, I remember one of my classes,
Jeremy, last century. Just say last century. Back when I was in.
Sure. Let's make the gray of my beard look a little grayer. So I remember one of my professors, he said that the average career in a particular role or job, and this was back in the 90s, is about 5 years.
Okay.
And that's what he said. And even then afterwards, I think if you look at the stats now, I think executives are in their role for roughly 5 years, and I think it's the same with people in their roles. They change jobs every 5 years. So to Susan's point, where you got to kind of learn and move and go along. It's like maybe we kind of brought this upon ourselves, because before, what Jeremy says, hey, you had people that stayed in their role in their job for 20, 30, 40 years. My dad was in his role was working with his company for 40 some odd years until he finally retired. But so maybe that's one thing. It's maybe we brought this upon ourselves because people just keep changing. But maybe, remember, people leave jobs because of either money or their boss. So if they want more money, they got to learn something else to go to another job. Or if they don't like their boss, they go somewhere else. So I just think that we still need to be that generalist type of view. And to the point about the letting go of that insane number of junior developers, is the code quality up because of their ability to prompt, or is it because of the smaller teams able to keep an eye on each other and how things are going?
It's prompting. There are no teams.
So no one's reviewing the code. There's no the lack of bureaucracy because of all the people. To me, I think it's a little too easy to say. Yep, it's the prompting. This is what's making everything work. I think there's probably more to it that's causing the better code quality. I think it has an impact, but I don't think it has as big of impact as what a lot of people seem to think it is.
We'll see.
I think there's more to it.
We'll see. So I think what I'm hearing from all of you, and I'll sort of summarize a bit and ask one or two more questions. Whether it's 5 years, whether it's 52 minutes, whether it's something else, right? That there seems to be a faster churn in a role or a profession. Who owns, at a person level or even at an organizational level, who owns making sure that you take people along?
I mean, the easy answer is it's both. It's both employee and leaders who own that. Perhaps that's a cop-out. Maybe you were looking for a more controversial answer, Tom, but I think it's both. Brad talked about people management. I'm a people manager right now, and I think one of the real fundamental responsibilities of a people leader is to work with your folks on personal development plans and professional development plans, whether that's I want to grow into a new role in my existing area of the company, or I want to blossom into something new elsewhere. But the part of that, at least in my world, needs to be driven by the individual. I'm not going to sit and tell somebody where they need to grow for sake of helping broaden their career or making that conversation easier. I think they need to take some of that onus upon themselves to do it.
Jeremy, historically, though, what did we tell people when they said they wanted to advance? We said, learn more about other parts of the company.
Yep.
Learn more about
totally
the product suite.
Yep.
So how do you do that if you're working in AI and you're working from home remotely?
Home.
That's always been a challenge.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, Brad. I mean, you can certainly immerse yourself in as many resources as you want, but there's no final exam, I guess, as weird as that sounds, to prove that you've learned some of these core concepts and can move forward. I think the the idea of a remote context promotes a lot of different things around interaction with people and exposing yourself to people who can ultimately help you advance your career. That makes it even potentially more challenging.
That was one of the justifications that's been given by some organizations for returning people to on-site activity.
Yep.
I'm reading Cal Newport's A World Without Email. And very frankly, I once upon a time was a big proponent of working remotely. Death to email. Go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of chime in as the sort of education person here, working as an adjunct at 3 universities and teaching certs, and say certs is a helpful path to that. Maybe a degree, depending on what you're doing. I know I went to school for mechanical engineering, and I went back to college to get my master's in engineering management to basically teach me how to work with people, because I didn't really learn that in undergraduate school. I just learned math, and I showed up and I was like, well, the math part is simple. What am I going to do with all these people here that how do I deal with people? And so, yeah, I got my master's to be able to deal with people. I don't think that education is the answer to everything, but it is the answer to some things. And I look at it as an opportunity to learn best practices, so I don't have to figure it out in the school of hard knocks, because that's the other way you figure it out. And I wanted to figure it out sooner than I was going to have to learn my lessons. So that's why I went back to school. And I like certs for just continuing. I got into Agile, and I really wanted to know more about Agile. So I started reading. I got a bunch of certs, and I don't know, one day people said, "You're an Agile expert." And I guess that kind of happens if you throw yourself in there. So, I agree with you on the being in the company helps a lot of those things. I've worked remotely on and off for a few decades, and I seem to figure out a way to interject myself, meet people one-on-one. I'm actually going to be next week. I'm going to go to one of my client sites because I happen to be in the area, and I'm going to poke my head in, and it'll make all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a fan of working remotely because of all the things I do. It would just be so impossible if I had to be on site everywhere. But I agree that it works better when people see each other. So I try to sort of make myself do that. I like people, so it's not challenging, but it is important to put an effort towards doing that. I agree with that.
Before we let Jeremy B jump in, Susan, I want to ask you, who owns, at an individual level or a company level, who owns making sure that people are brought along?
I gotta agree with Jeremy. I mean, it's easy to say leadership owns that, but people have to be committed to that themselves also. I know I didn't get to where I got professionally because I waited for somebody to help me out. I definitely wanted partnership with that, and I wanted support, but I stepped up. I remember saying, "Hey, I'm bored. I want something more to do." Or at my reviews, I'd be like, "Okay, what's the next step to get to the next level?" And people would be like, do you want a promotion now?" I'm like, "No, but I will one day, so I want to know what it is now." And I constantly tell people who say, "Ooh, I hope I get a promotion one day." And I'm like, "Did you tell anybody that?" People are like, "No." Like, well, if you don't tell anybody, they're not going to know. And if you're working for me and I didn't happen to ask you because I'm kind enough to do so, I'm just going to assume you like doing what you're doing. So why would I go change that? So I agree with Jeremy. It's both parties, and unfortunately, I see a lot of people in management roles that know nothing about leadership, and I'm not the most empathetic person. Don't mistake me for my gender. I'm an engineer, so it's I'm all about the facts, just the facts. But I do take a moment and say, okay, it's actually about people. Like, fundamentally, it's about people. That's why I'm back and got my engineering management degree, because it's about people. But yeah, I think we are responsible for ourselves,
There we go.
And leadership is also responsible.
Yeah, I buy it someday that maybe leadership should be responsible. I don't think they are. I think we are responsible. But that's my own personal belief. Mr. Barrio, I know I've sort of held you at bay as you were chomping at the bit.
What? Did I look that antsy, just trying to like, let me in. So I'm reminded of I did a LinkedIn Live and a YouTube Live event last week or a couple weeks ago, losing track of time, where I'm talking about like fixing the system. And I talk about how we've created basically Frankenstein's monster within the organization. Like one of the things I put out there and I said, and I truly believe, is that like leaders are involved in creating your ecosystem and making sure everything works. Now here's the caveat, is that everyone is considered a leader regardless of role or title. So leaders have to keep each other accountable. So that means everyone has to keep each other accountable to ensure that the ecosystem and all of its elements are working effectively and efficiently so that they can survive. When you don't have that, if you have one part that just kind of dies off or doesn't do anything or it's disconnected, then basically the entire ecosystem fails. So yeah, like leaders have to do it, but we're all leaders in what we do, regardless of title.
I think at some point I want to unpack that. I'm a Demingite. I would argue that it isn't leaders that own it. It's management that owns it. And you might have everybody be leaders, but management owns the means of production and own the culture. But we can have that argument at a different time. We'll bring in some more Demingites to have that conversation. Folks, this has been wonderful. I don't know. I think it really is. We are at an interesting cusp. And when I first started discussing things like AI with folks, 5 or 6 years ago on the podcast, the answer was, this will be no dislocation. There will be no dislocation. And now at this point, even some of the same folks, with perhaps, some minor exceptions, are all finally coming to the conclusion that the answer is there's going to be a phenomenal dislocation. This is going to make the Industrial Revolution kind of dislocation look tame. We'll see. Obviously, I don't know that level of hair on fire is coming. But if we are having to shift to all generalists or to significantly more generalists, I think we're at a point where people are going to have to learn real quickly. I guess we'll see. I think we'll wrestle with some of these other topics at our next panel discussion. But I want to thank you for spending the time today to have this conversation. And I think all of us would be very interested in how the listeners react to this stuff. And, if the listeners have a passion on one end or the other, we'd be happy to reconvene the panel and have them come on and have this discussion. At least a half dozen of them. If 1,000 people want to come, I don't think my Zoom account will deal with that. So until next time, thank you again for providing your opinions, controversial or not. Some yes, some no, and away we'll run. Until next time. In the next software process and measurement cast, habits or rituals? Have your daily events become habits with all of the conscious thought you give to scratching your ear? You probably thought I was going to say something else. Why this matters? If true, the value and joy from these events have probably gone the way of your conscious thought, and that is a bad thing. Teams that get no value from retrospectives, for example, just go through the motions and then quit. This is true for any repeated event. We'll be back with this panel discussion in the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 870 This will post on July 6th. For the summer of 2025, we'll drop bi-weekly and focus on panel discussions. If you want to participate, we're always looking for another voice. Email me at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?